All right, good morning. So I want to just make a quick video talking about vetting a property or comping a property. Those are the two most common terms you'll hear investors use when they want to come up with the ARV of a property. ARV stands for actual retail value or after repair value. So it can have that same meaning, but what that means is once you have a property and it gets all fixed up, this is the value that we feel that the property is going to be worth, what we can turn around and resell this property for. So we always need to know what the ARV of a property is before we make an offer, decide on what repairs we want to do, everything. So the ARV is really important. When we say we want to comp or vet a property, and that's exactly what it means, that we want to come up with the ARV. So to discuss that a little bit further, how do we come up with the ARV of a property? Well, there's a couple different ways, and there's a couple things that we always do. The first of those being we are always going to look at similar properties. So when I say similar properties, if our subject property is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath property, we want to look at other sold properties that were 3-bedroom, 2-bath. If the property we have does not have a pool, I don't want to look at properties that sold that have a pool. So the first thing I do when I go to comp a property is I'll go to the county's or city's property appraiser site. What I do then is I pull up our subject property, and subject property is the property that we want to come up with the value of. So I'll pull up that property on the county appraiser site, and I'll leave it up there while I do my whole analysis. And the reason I do that is so I can compare apples to apples, meaning I have my property pulled up, I can see that it was built in 1950, it has 3 bedrooms, it has 2 bathrooms, and to keep things simple, I'm going to say it has 1,500 square feet, 1,500 square feet. So, first things first, when I go onto a site like Zillow, for example, or my local MLS, which you're only going to have access to if you're a realtor. But when I go onto Zillow, what I would do is I would look at sold properties over the past 6 months, which would be 180 days, because these are going to be the most accurate, meaning anybody that goes to come up with the value of a property, that's what they're going to look at, those last 180 days of sales. So the first thing I do is I make that my filter. Everything sold in the past 6 months. After that, I'm going to narrow my results down to the same bedroom and bathroom count as my property. So I'm going to make sure I'm only looking at 3-bedroom, 2-bath properties that were sold in the past 6 months. And now I'm going to add another filter, and that's going to be properties with similar square footage. So if you remember, I had said our properties have 1,500 square feet, our subject property. So I'm going to expand my search results for everything plus or minus 250 to 300 square feet. So if we have 1,500 square feet, I will consider all sold 3-bedroom, 2-bath properties between 1,200 and 1,800 square feet. So you can see I took our subject properties living square footage of 1,500. I subtracted 300 from that number, and I added 300 to that number to have my range. So I have a 1,200 to 1,800 square foot range. And then I'll slowly add more filters depending on how many results I have. If I have too many results, it's not worth it. So I'll always filter it down more and more depending on how many results. If it's showing me 10 properties all close by that have those same similar sold results, I'm going to add in some more filters. For instance, the garage. If my property has a garage and some of these other sold properties do not, I would remove them. I want to get to the closest similar type property as possible. And we're always doing this for a finished property. So a lot of comps that we use, we want to be properties that are completely finished. And when I say completely finished, I mean they've been updated, they're livable, they are not properties that are in bad condition. I like to come up with two different numbers for what the property is worth. I like to look up and comp what the property is worth when it's completely fixed up, meaning everything's been done to it. It's clean, it's move-in ready, it's a livable house. But I also like to come up with what the value would be if I were to just turn around and sell this property in a bare bones condition. And when I say bare bones, I mean if the property did not have anything done to it, it was in bad condition. Oftentimes you can find a lot of other properties in an area that were sold in that same condition, because there's so many investors out there, so many people doing what we're doing, which is buying a distressed or a dilapidated property, fixing it up and reselling it. So oftentimes what we can do is we could go back in our records and we can look in a neighborhood or in an area and we can look at properties that sold for cash. Usually a cash transaction happens on properties that are distressed or somebody's selling at a discount. So those are good properties for us to look at, because there is a good chance that if we can see that there was 3 properties that were sold for all cash and they weren't even fixed up, well, that's a good assumptive indicator of what we should be able to turn around and sell that property quickly for all cash as well. So if I'm getting a good property if I'm getting a bad property that is in bad condition and I'm trying to figure out an offer that I want to make, and I see that there was a whole bunch of other houses that sold for all cash that were also in bad condition, and all those houses were selling for $100,000, how great would it be if I could get my property for $80,000, $90,000? That means it would probably be pretty easy for me to go find a cash buyer willing to pay me the $100,000, and now I just made, the difference in that money. But anyways, that's just a quick way of how we come up with the comparables of a property. A couple other things I like to do is I will go on Zillow and take note, meaning I'll at least write down what their Zestimate number is, which is the number that Zillow thinks that my property is worth. So I will write that down. And then I also have another website I use, truepropertyvalue.com. I believe that's the website. And I will do the same thing as Zillow, meaning I will go on there, I will just put in the address, see what it tells me they feel the property is worth, and take note of that as well. And then I do it with one other site. That way I have 3 numbers that were all auto-generated by websites based on their data, their analysis. And this one is called iComps, ICOMPS.com. And this is a neat website because when you put in the address and it gives you their number of what they think the property is worth, they're also going to give you what the other comparable properties are that sold in the area. So it doesn't get much easier than that in terms of comping a property. The nice thing is theirs will even show you the distance it is from the house, because I don't like to go more than a half mile to a mile out. A mile is usually my max distance that I will go outside of where my property is to come up with values. And that's because every neighborhood's a little different, from street to street or pocket to pocket. So just because I have a house that sits on this one street right here and I see the house behind me sold for $500,000, it doesn't really mean that's what my house is worth, because $500,000 for the property right behind me could be a completely different neighborhood that has a gated entrance and just different features. So you can never really compare it street to street. You just need to know your neighborhoods. And that's what makes comping properties very specific. Yes, there's a lot of research we can do on the computer, and I can have you do to check out and come up with what you feel the property's worth. But there's really nothing better than doing that and being able to drive your neighborhood, drive the streets, and get a gut feeling for what your property is worth. So those are some of the ways that I use to comp properties. Again, that iComps website is really neat because you can go there and it gives you this long list of sold properties, and it's telling you how far away they were. It's showing you the date that it sold for, the price, and then specs on the property. So it's really easy to come up with what your comps are and what some of those values are from a website like that. And hopefully we'll get more and more websites like that popping up, although it makes it a little bit easy for everybody to go and comp a property. I think it's great for being able to hand that work over to somebody like a virtual assistant or an assistant that you have in your office to get them in the groove of doing this as well. But yeah, if there's any questions about how to comp a property, feel free to shoot me a message, reach out, just ask me. It's pretty straightforward the way we do this. And of course, there's going to be times where you just don't have good comps, especially when you look at weird, unique properties. Like, I'm trying to think like a property, for instance, that has a lot of square footage or lot size, like a one that could be sometimes an issue is when you have big properties like an acre of land, because if you're dealing with properties in the city and the county and you're dealing with neighborhoods and all of a sudden you get this property that has a lot of land, you might not find a property within a mile radius that has a lot of land. So there's always something that can make your property a little bit unique, especially when we're talking about the type of properties that we buy. But again, it's about getting as close as you can, and as you get better and better at this, you start to figure out and realize what one thing adds in value that something else doesn't. So if every single one of my comparable properties, for instance, has a 2-car garage and my property doesn't, and there's no other properties to look at that don't have a garage, and I'm having to use those comps with a garage, what an appraiser is going to do, or what we should get good at doing, is knowing what that really adds extra to a property. So if I see that all my properties have 2-car garages and mine doesn't, if I've been doing this long enough, I start to realize what a garage will add in value to my property. And for instance, in our market, garages and pools tend to add about $10,000 in value, especially under the $300,000 price range. But a garage is very valuable. Same thing as a bedroom. An extra bedroom can be the same thing. It could be a difference of $10,000, $15,000. So those are items that you just get better at understanding. The more you comp, the more you learn how to mess with the numbers and adjust them to make up for the differences in a property versus your subject's property. I hope this was valuable. I hope it wasn't too scattered and all over the place. The idea is just to give you an understanding of things we look for and things you should pay attention to, and some resources you can use to come up with values. At the end of the day, the very best place for you to go get accurate values and sales numbers is going to be through your local MLS, since that is where most retail transactions happen these days. Yes, Zillow and those sites offer a lot of for sale by owner type sales, but at the end of the day, appraisers are actually going off of MLS sales. So an appraiser is always going to pull up sales of properties that were listed and sold, and they can find an actual record on. They will not be going and using comparables for properties that were sold off market by owner, because they don't usually have pictures to look at those properties, and they can't really tell if that was an arm's length transaction or not, meaning, you know, was it a family member or a friend or somebody they sold the property to, where they could have just fudged or made up those numbers. Either way, hope you guys got something out of this, and that is how we comp and value a property.